Hi, welcome back to another skills video. In this session we're going to be looking at lesson structure. So let's have a look at what we're going to be doing today. So these are points to consider when developing this skill. So what have we got? We're going to look at the ROMPS method of structuring your lesson, and we'll go through that in a little bit. We're going to look at managing your time, how that links with route planning, so how the skill of structuring a lesson, you have to think about how the route will work in with that. We're going to think about does your lesson structure, does it match the ability and experience of your pupil? We're going to have a little delve into the driving syllabus, and we're going to think about teaching skills and then transferring them over to subjects rather than teaching subjects. So let's have. Okay, so let's first look at the part 3 marking sheet. So let's just grab that. Here we go. So we're looking at where does this skill come into the ADI part 3 marking sheet. Well, if we look at the second one, was the agreed lesson structure appropriate for the pupil's experience and ability? So that's primarily the one we're going to be looking at. But if we get the lesson structure correct, it'll also fix other points on here. For example, at the end of a lesson, we'll do a summary, and here, there's a separate competence for this. So if we build in a summary into our lesson structure, then we're going to take care of this competency here at the end as well. So let's just have a look at, was the agreed lesson structure appropriate to the pupil's experience and ability? So let's delve into the ADI 1 document, which I've got open here, and we're down on page 48. Okay, so let's just go through some of the points here. So was the agreed lesson structure appropriate for the pupil's experience and ability? The lesson structure should allow, let's zoom in on that actually, let's just make that a bit bigger on the screen. There we go, that's better, isn't it? The lesson structure should allow the pupil to progress at a manageable rate, stretching them without overwhelming them. For example, a pupil who is concerned about entering roundabouts should not be asked to tackle fast-flowing, multi-lane, multi-exit junctions on their first attempt. Neither should they be restricted to very quiet junctions unless the PDI identifies a potential risk issue that they want to come and check out first. So let's just delve into that. Let's say you are planning to do busier roundabouts as part of the lesson because you're going to move them up a level. Well, it's perfectly acceptable to let them have a little warm-up go on some quieter roundabouts just to start the lesson, get them back in the groove. So that's what that line refers to there. Unless the PDI identifies potential risk issue and they want to check that out first. So if they're worried about their speed on approach or judging gaps or just the MSPSL routine in general, we could just warm them up, but don't spend too long there if we don't need to. So so that's just an example of that. Indicators that all elements of this competency are in place would include ensuring the pupil understands what they plan to do and agrees with that plan. So we talked about that previously with agreeing goals, and that's in a separate video. A lesson plan that reflects the information given by the pupil and the learning goals they want to tackle. Building in opportunities to check the statements made by the pupil before moving to more challenging situations. Checking theoretical understanding. And indications of a lack of competency would include delivering a pre-planned standard lesson that doesn't take into account the pupil's expressed needs or concerns. Failing to build in a suitable balance of practice and theory. So we want to keep the theory, the talking, the stationary car to a minimum, and we want to maximise our time practicing moving the car. So because that's where learning is going to take place. So if there was an imbalance on that and you were spending too much time pulling up and talking about all the situations they might face and sort of turning it into a theory lesson, you're going to be marked down in this competency. The one above, delivering a pre-planned standard lesson. So if you're starting to deliver generic lesson. So you might have a sort of a template of how you deliver a lesson on roundabouts, but you know that needs to be adapted pupil by pupil, lesson by lesson, roundabout by roundabout as that pupil develops and learns. So so if you got kind of get stuck into sort of standard pre-planned, like, you know, I've planned my route, we're going to go here and we're going to spend 10 minutes there, then we're going to go over here and spend 5 minutes there and do this and do that, and if you've worked all that out in your head before before the lesson, before the test, and you stick rigidly to that plan, well, that's not client-centered. You need to be meeting the needs of your pupil, and that's really what this competency is about. So let's have a look at the things we've got here. So that kind of puts it into context. So let's have a look at ROMPs and that lesson structure. So basically, a lesson needs to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. So there'll be a beginning part where you recap on what happened last time, set some goals, give a briefing if necessary. The middle part will be, you know, the big part. This is where you'll spend most of your time dedicated to practicing. And as you practice, as you see faults, mistakes, learning opportunities, you'll redefine the goals and adapt your lesson in the middle part. Then at the end, there'll be a summary where you can summarize with the pupil and get your pupil to self-reflect, self-evaluate. So just let's whiz down and look at this ROMP structure. So I've just got that on a separate page here. That's it. Okay. So what does ROMP stand for? So basically it's recap, objectives, main points, practice, summary. So that's where ROMPs is coming from. So it's a nice little structure that you can use on all your lessons. So yeah, the recap, let's delve down into that. So you could be looking at faults on the way to this test centre. If you were using this for your part 3 test lesson, then think about just what happened in the drive to the test centre, or you might have decided or dedicated 30 minutes to drive as part of the lesson before picking up the examiner. So just let's recap on what just happened, the most relevant recent thing, because that's really going to be what you need to work on. Okay, if you didn't do that or nothing come up, then talk about the last lesson. So what happened last lesson? You might want to look at reflective logs and think about what was happening there. How did your pupil feel? What did they want to achieve next lesson? So all your lessons are joined up and flow. So having a nice structure. And then any recap on routines. So if you was going to be, I don't know, dealing with T-junctions, you might be talking about MSPSL. You might be talking about some of the rules that you apply to judge it, like the walk across, drive across rule. You might be looking at LADA. So anything relevant to that lesson that's going to help them remember it. Okay, so that's your recap. Then you're going to look at the objectives, and we need to think about needs versus wants. So what does that pupil actually need versus what they want? Because they don't always mean the same thing, and that has been covered in a separate video where we talked about agreeing goals. So I won't go too much into that, just watch that video. Agree with the pupil what they want to achieve. That's a good question. What would you like to achieve by the end of today's lesson? Yeah, if we're looking at roundabouts, you know, what will success look like? What do you want to achieve? Like, is it, be specific? Is it yeah, I'd like to be more confident at judging gaps. Okay, so now we've agreed that with the pupil, and this, by the end of that lesson, if we've achieved that, then that's going to be good. We could use scaling, the scaling model, getting the pupil to scale themselves on a scale of 1 to 10, so how confident they're feeling, which is a good one. You know, so how confident are you at judging the gaps on the roundabout, from a scale of 1 to 10, 1 not being very confident at all and 10 like really confident. And then they can sort of, you know, say where they are, you know, so they might say they're a 4 or 5. So, you know, where would you like to be by the end of the lesson? Up to a 6, a 7 would be good. So, you know, so we can sort of got some way of measuring it. Agreeing levels of I can't even say it. Agree levels of instruction as part of your objectives. So how much help will you need from me to achieve these things? Okay, and as it said in the competency in the ADI one, stretch versus struggle. You know, we don't want to overwhelm our pupil. We want it to be challenging for the pupil, so learning takes place. We don't want it too easy, but we definitely don't want it too hard. So it's striking the right balance. So that's the objectives. Then the main points. This is where we're going to do any explanations or briefings. So, you know, is it a new topic? Because do you need a briefing? If they've done this before, just a few questions around it, just to recap on what they've already learned and then get on to practice. But if it's a new subject and they need some help with sort of knowing the rules and how it's going to be done, you might use visual aids to do this. So allocate some time to, you know, give some kind of briefing. Now, just a point to note on a part 3 or a standard check, you don't want to be spending time stationary talking, because one, during COVID you haven't got the time, and even when COVID's all done and dusted, examiners don't really want to hear you give a long briefing. So so if you need to do one in a test scenario, I would do your briefings before you pick the examiner up, so then you can just do a short little recap on the main points of what you learned, so you can ask the people and they can tell you back what they've done. But obviously in real life you will have to do briefings, and just keep them short and to the point, keep them relevant. Okay, so ask questions to check understanding, as I've just said. So, you know, if they've done that before, just sort of see what they know. And also, don't talk to your pupil with a new subject as if they've just come from the planet Mars, because, you know, they would have been passengers. They will have some common sense. You can ask them questions. So don't think you have to tell. You can ask, you know, how do you think you're going to judge that gap at the roundabout? What would you be looking for? Where would you be looking to develop your Q&A technique? Okay, as I've already said, keep it relevant to today's lesson. So make it relevant to the goals that you want to achieve. Make it relevant to the route that you're going to be going on. So if you're going to be dealing with multi-lane roundabouts, and that they're not spiral roundabouts, don't start briefing about spiral roundabouts if they're not going to get to do that today. Save that briefing for when you're going to do it. So keep it relevant. That will help you keep things short and to the point. And lastly, as we just said there, keep it brief. Briefing should be brief. In terms of time, you know, if it's a new topic, I would suggest 5-6 minutes. If you're needing more than 10 minutes, I would suggest that you're covering too much and that you could break that down into smaller chunks. So yeah, if you're finding you're having to do long old briefings, then just think, well, are you covering 2 or 3 topics in there? Could you not just talk about one specific thing, get them going, then build on to the next thing? So that will help you keep your briefings short, because that's a real problem with PDIs, trying to keep briefings short and to the point, because they can run on a little bit. Okay, so next, the practice. So we're getting into the practice. So allow plenty of time to practice new skills. This is where learning would take place. So most of the time, the lion's share of the time should be allocated to practice, 75% plus. Okay, watch the pupil and fix faults. So during the practice, watch them, fix faults. We've done a separate video on that, on the fixing the faults, and be prepared to adapt. You've got to adapt. You've got to change the plan when it's required. When it becomes necessary to do that, adapt soon and quickly and gain agreement from the pupil. Keep the wheels rolling, keep it moving. Only pull up and get stationary after a safety critical, or whether you need to adapt the plan and sort of restart. I always think if you're putting up to sort of have a kind of timeout, things are obviously going quite bad, safety critical things happen, you're starting to lose control of this lesson. Maybe it's pitched at the wrong level, maybe it's too difficult for your pupil, or too easy, and you're just sort of saying, do you know what, let's just have a timeout, and you're like restarting the lesson. So, and gain that agreement that you're going to move on to either make it easier or harder if you need to. So So yeah, that can be done on the move, but sometimes it might be easier just to sort of like think, right, especially if it's safety critical and there's a lot going on, just to sort of say, do you know what, little time out, we're just gonna have a chat, we're gonna change the plan, we're gonna adapt. Okay, and make sure that's timely. And then summary at the end, encourage your pupil to self-reflect. That's like holding a mirror up in front of them and getting them to sort of say how they feel they did. You can help them with that and steer them with that. So if they're just sort of blank, well, I don't know really, how do? I don't know. Well, tell me about that roundabout when the BMW come. How did you? Oh yeah, okay. So yeah, what would you have done differently then? And get it out of them. Okay, so yeah, encourage that. Keep it relevant based on what just happened, and don't be generic, because I believe a lot of instructors believe, to get a 3 in that last box about at the end of the lesson, was the pupil encouraged to reflect on their own performance? It has to be relevant. You can't just sort of have a generic sort of statement and say, how do you think you did today? Yeah, I think you did really well. Great. Okay, so what we're going to do next lesson? That doesn't get you 3 points. So base it on what just happened. Talk about the relevant things. I always think about it as if you just went to a football match and you had 2 minutes to explain to someone just what happened. So the football match lasted 90 minutes and you got 2 minutes just to sort of say what the highlights were, what the score was, the main things, like who was the man of the match, what went wrong, any red cards, just keep it short and to the point and relevant to what you just witnessed. And your pupil won't be very good at that. You'll have to steer them and sort of say, okay, so so how did you feel about this situation? Yeah, and then remind them of what just happened. So that's what you need to do. A good one to ask your pupil is, what would your pupil take away? So what would you take away from this lesson? What would you learn? If you use scaling, revisit that. So if there was a 3 or 4 on their confidence on judging a gap at a roundabout, where are they now? Have they moved up? If they start saying they're a 10, I'd challenge that, because are they really? What would a 10 look like? Hopefully you would look like a 10 after years of experience. So examiners have said in the past where scaling's been like 9s and 10s, they think, well, be realistic. It's like they're not. So don't give them false sense of security. Don't make them overconfident, because they're still learning and beginning. They're not a 10, so just be aware of that. And then of course, in the summary plans for next lesson, building on this, where are we going to take it next time? So when you get in the car next time, when you're doing your recap, then you're back in, hit the ground running, so it's all comes back. So keeping reflective logs. Our driving school, we use an app to do that, where the people can write their own app in the car or when they get home. Best to do it in the car afterwards. And in terms of a part 3 test, you can't say, oh, well, go away and reflect and tell me next week. The examiner needs to see that. He needs to be part of that and hear it. Okay, so that's ROMPS. That's our ROMPS routine. Okay, so we've talked about time management. So most of your time needs to be allocated to practice. When you're planning lessons with your pupils, make sure that you leave enough time in between lessons so you get from one to the other. Think about your travel distances. And make sure you start on time and make sure you finish on time. So leave yourself enough time at the end to have your little chat. As a newly qualified driving instructor, I'd sort of get them back on time, and then realise I've got to try and get them booked in for next week, do a little summary, and always would feel rushed. So leave yourself 5 minutes at the end to do that, 5 minutes at the start to set your goals and things, but make sure you leave plenty of time for practice. Okay, so also with your lesson structuring, you want to think about route planning, because as I've said, your route needs to be relevant to what your goals are. So if your pupil wants to be looking at pedestrian crossings, make sure there's going to be plenty of variety of pedestrian crossings where you're going, and also think about the time you've got to get there, get back, on all of those kind of things. So make sure that in terms of your lesson structure, as we've already mentioned, that the structure matches the ability and experience of your pupil, because we want to stretch them, but we don't want them to struggle. And we're going to look at the driving syllabus now, so let's just have a little look at that. Okay, because I often get asked, what is the order that you teach your learners? Like they want a list of, this is what I do on week 3, I do that, and then on week 4 I do this, and week 5 I'm going to do that, and they want a plan in that much detail. Well, that's just not practical to do that, because hopefully by now you've realised that every pupil is different, every pupil has different learning needs. Where you start the lesson and the routes you've got available to you will influence that. So there isn't a predetermined list of when you need to do things and when you need to do them by. What I would say, what I've always done with my pupils is within the first 10 hours that they've fully bonded with the car, so their car control skills are good. And we've moved on to various road types. So they would have done all sort of junctions. They would have done T junctions, Y junctions, roundabouts, traffic lights. They would have done all the manoeuvres, so they've had to go at parking. And they might have had to go on dual carriageways and rural roads towards the end of that 10 hours. So it always dependent on their ability. But generally, I have always found that a capable pupil with the right training in 10 hours has sort of done a little bit of everything. And then from that, the next sort of 20, 30 hours is bringing those skills up so that they can do that independently on their own. Okay, so there is no simple answer to an order. Obviously, you're going to start with a beginner on things like cockpit drill, what the controls do, moving off, stopping, steering, changing gears, controlling the car. And now to open up the world, the practice route, so they can learn more, pretty soon you're going to need to do some junctions. And then pretty soon after that, you're going to want to do some roundabouts. So now you can spread your area and the routes and the learning. So that's where I would sort of generally start. So let's just look at the driving syllabus. You can just Google that. Just type in learning to drive a car syllabus. And let's actually have a look. So if you haven't seen this already, this quite often surprises people as to the structure of it. So there's 4 units. Unit 1 is preparing the vehicle and its occupants for the journey. Unit 2 is guide and control the vehicle, so your car control. Unit 3 is drive in accordance with the highway code, so dealing with the rules. And Unit 4, drive safely and efficiently. So this is like defensive driving, dealing with other people's anticipation, awareness, to fit in with the driving system. So let's just briefly have a skip to each of the heading pages, which I've written down. So if we go to page 6, just to give you a little overview. So preparing the vehicle and its occupants for the journey. So when you're teaching your learners, this is how you should be thinking of, to make sure you cover everything they need for a lifetime of driving and not just to pass the test. So, this unit looks at them. Are they fit to drive? Drugs, alcohol, fatigue, things like that. If they're on medication. The passengers and the vehicle. So this is where your vehicle safety checks will come in and things like that. So that is the sort of syllabus. And you're not going to do this on lesson 1. They don't want to know how to pump the tyres up. They want to get moving. So you will incorporate these as you go through your lessons. When you come to do your part 3 test or standards check, you'll be taking a passenger. Have they had a passenger in the car before? You may be have already had your trainer in the car on a lesson with your test pupil, so possibly they have. Whose roles and responsibilities are to make sure the passenger's safe? Who's checking that? So these are learning opportunities that you could bring in on your Part 3 test when you've got that passenger. You could ask your pupil to say, okay, so we've got a passenger today, so who's responsible? Or as you could ask them, as a responsible driver, what is your responsibility today over our passenger? And they could say, oh yeah, check they got the seatbelt on. Okay, so how would you do that? I could ask them. Good. What else would you check? That the door's shut. Good. And anything else? Oh, the head restraint. Yeah, I'd check they've done the head restraint. Brilliant. And how do you think that will affect the drive today? What else do we need to think about? Oh, is it the extra weight? Maybe a little bit more gas when moving off? Exactly. So, so there's some relevance there, isn't there? That we've got the passenger and it fits into what's in the syllabus. And this all links with the national standards as well. So if you haven't read national standards, read that. Okay, let's look at another next one. Page 17. So guide and control the vehicle. So this is all about what the learning outcomes on this one. It's all about controlling the car. Treat learning to drive as an ongoing learning experience. To be able to start, move off, stop, leave the vehicle safely and appropriate, handbrake neutral, how to steer the car, etc. So that deals with, as it says, guide and control the vehicle. So basic car control. The next one on page 26, drive in accordance with the highway code. So, no surprise here. The aim of this unit is to help understand why it's important to understand and comply with the highway code. And these are the learning outcomes listed here. Okay, so that they can respond to signals, signs, road markings, traffic calming measures, etc. So you can see these things will be brought in throughout your lessons. So when you're structuring your lessons, you might be doing rural roads, but today, for the first time, you're going to go through a ford because you've changed the route. So now that is relevant. So that's how you will structure your lesson and bring that to the party on your rural roads, or you're going to deal with level crossings. Because you can't just do rural roads and tick all the boxes and do everything in one lesson. That wouldn't be realistic. You never do it all. So this is what we mean by structuring the lesson. And number 4 on page 30, drive safely and efficiently. Efficiently. I can't even say it. So yes, this unit focuses on minimising the risk when driving, eco-safe and defensive driving techniques, interaction with other road users. So yeah, all self-explanatory stuff there. So yeah, so this hopefully will answer your question as to what is the driving syllabus and how do you order it. Well, that job is yours. That's the skill of being an instructor, to plan your lessons, plan what's going in, plan your route, to make it all come together over the course of 30, 40, 50 hours you'll have with your pupil. Okay, and finally, I just want to talk about teaching skills and then transfer those skills to subjects. So basically, when learning to drive, to think of the mark of a good driver, what makes a good driver. They will have certain skills. So be expert in controlling the car. Think of you on your part 2. So expert controls car control skills. You'll have a higher level of awareness. Because of that awareness, you're recognising what other people might do. So you're anticipating what they're doing. And once you've anticipated what they're doing, you can plan what you're going to do. So this is now what you're doing to deal with that situation. And then we've got skills of judgment. How do you judge getting a gap on a roundabout? How do you judge pulling out of a junction so you don't slow down the other cars? How do you judge parking into a bay so you don't have to correct it or go through the lines? So they're the skills, and then we can transfer those skills to the subjects. So there's a separate series that you're going to watch after this, where we're going to look at each subject, and that's going to help you sort of plan and structure each subject. But all these skills are transferable. So if you've got a pupil that goes in too fast to roundabouts, well, you're really thinking about their awareness, anticipation, planning, and their judgment skills. So how are they going to judge? How will they know when to start braking? Things like that. So that kind of sums up the scope of this one. We've done our lesson structure. So I will see you in the next skills video. Thanks for watching.